Well, welcome everybody to Lighthouse Church. I am so glad that we were able to connect today online, wherever you're watching from, whatever device you're watching from. I just want to say you are so welcome. And hey, do me a favor, don't forget to like, comment on, or subscribe to our channels. We really are doing all that we can to get some positive vibes out there. How many know we need some positive vibes, people, out there online? All the negative stuff going on in lockdown. We want to just get some positive truth out there to help encourage and bless some people. So again, every time, every comment, every like, every subscribe helps us do that massively. Again, if you're new or watching for the first time, you're especially welcome. My name is Jamie, and I'm one of the pastors here and staff at Lighthouse Church. And you have joined us for what is going to be the first Sunday of a brand new series called Apologetic. And we're so excited about this series. It actually was voted the #1 series we did in 2019. And so we decided in lockdown, what could cheer us up is to bring it back and have another go at it this time around. And of course, what we're doing in this series is a little bit different to what we usually do, in the sense that this selection of talks, if you want to call it that, is not so much sermonic or message based, but far more a conversation or lecture based, okay? Because over the next 4 weeks, we're going to take an approach on what is going to be 4 subject matters, 4 issues that are both widely known, but also can be perceived as being very problematic when it comes to embracing the Christian faith. And what we're going to do as we tackle each one of these problems is we're going to address them from a rational, logical, evidence-based, scientific point of view, as opposed to just the easy way of believing and saying, "Oh, God said." We're actually going to wrestle, well, what God said, but what does God mean as we look at each one of these things? And of course, the topics we're going to cover this time around are hypocrisy. A lot of that going on in Ireland and has happened historically, and a lot of people just simply cannot embrace faith because of the hypocrisy of the church. So next Sunday, in week 2, we're going to tackle that. We're also going to talk about hell, the idea that people could end up in eternal damnation, and how can you worship, serve, love a God who would do that to people. And then in week 4, we're going to close off looking at what's called the rock of atheism, okay? Evil and suffering. Answering the question, how does a benevolent, loving, and kind God allow so much evil and suffering? Should that not, disprove the existence of God? How could that possibly back up, support, or even prove God's existence? It's going to be a great series. And again, if you're someone right now and you're a Christ follower, let me just say that my heart behind this is I want to equip you with the knowledge and the language and the resource to be able to give a rational defense of your faith. Being a Christian does not mean you're stupid. Being a Christian does not mean you don't have a brain. Being a Christian does not mean you've dropped down a few levels on the intellectual ladder. You can be a Christ follower, fervently, passionately serving God, and also be someone with academic skill and a powerful intellect. And especially right now, if you're someone who's in the second half of secondary school or transitioning into college and 3rd level, I want to equip you, okay? I want you to know as your pastor that you do not have to abandon your Christian faith just because one professor in a lecture quoted some non-Christian philosopher. I want to give you the tools to be able to build and develop a faith that can stand up to the scrutiny of a world that believes something different to us. Now, if you're also watching and you're not a believer, you're coming to this talk today skeptical, maybe you're an atheist, maybe you're agnostic, maybe you're a lapsed Christian, not that someone overlapped you in your faith, but that you fell away from your faith, then I'm so glad that you are here too, because that's exactly what we're doing. We're answering a skeptic's challenge. These are problems that skeptics give us and say, I can't really believe in faith because of these things. It's going to be such a great opportunity for you to get your teeth into and wrestle with us with some of these great and intriguing topics. All I ask for is an open mind, because we all know the kind of popular belief on a lot of these things, as I'm going to talk about today. We've seen them, we've read them, we've heard them, but not many of us have heard the other side of the conversation, okay? We haven't heard the Christian side of things, or we've heard of an oversimplified, dumbed down, and sometimes quite embarrassing portrayal of the Christian side of things. Now, Most of the research that I've done on this, most of the content I'm going to be using comes from the book of a book that a friend of mine wrote called The Problem of God. Good buddy of mine, Pastor Mark Clark. Shout out to Pastor Mark, good friend of mine. He leads a great church in Vancouver, Canada. He wrote this book. I would encourage you to buy this book, get it online, in Kindle version, get it in hard copy. It's well worth the investment. He's an amazing leader, got a huge heart for the academic world, and does a great job in his book. But the reason why he called it The Problem of God is because each one of these issues, hell, hypocrisy, evil, and suffering, as we're going to see today's topic also, they're problematic, or supposedly problematic, to embracing a worldview of faith and belief in God. The word problem in the English dictionary is defined as a question that is raised for inquiry, clarification, or solution, an intricate or unsettled question. In other words, the reason why problems exist, or what a problem is in essence, it's a question raised that is looking for further clarification of the meaning. So as we talk about the problem of hell, the problem of hypocrisy, the problem of evil and suffering, we are questioning these things. We're inquiring, we're looking for clarification as to why these things are perceived to be problematic to the Christian faith. And the reason why we're doing this is because there seems to be a surge, there's a rise right now of these kind of conversations at a popular level. There's a surge of content online, on YouTube, on social media, where people are wrestling with these problems. And this is evident in certain public figures who were maybe obscure people 5 years ago in their professional fields, but now they've gone viral. People like, for example, this guy, Jordan Peterson, who is a well-known author, public speaker, modern-day philosopher, actually a clinical psychologist and professor out of Toronto, Canada. But he has literally gone global. I mean, he's worldwide. He's viral simply because he is trying to wrestle with some of these things. In fact, kind of like laying a foundation for our series, he said this, and I quote, "If we lived in truth, capital T, if we spoke the truth, capital T, watch this, then we could walk with God once again and respect ourselves and others and the world. Then we might treat ourselves like people we cared for. We might strive to set the world straight. We might orientate it towards heaven, where we would want people we cared for to dwell, instead of hell, where our resentment and hatred would eternally sentence everyone," unquote. Again, Jordan, I'm not sure he's a Christian. I don't know the answer to that question, but he's definitely a theist. He's someone who, through his thinking, through his wrestling, through his answering these questions, addressing these problems, has come to believe that there's something beyond what we see in this world. And his journey, and his transition, his wrestling, I believe, is reflected right now all over the world. So today, in part one, we're going to kick off this apologetic series by looking at the problem of science. The problem of science. Again, when I say problem, it's the perceived tension. It's a false dichotomy, actually, between Christianity, Jesus, God, the Christian message in the church, and science. Many people are led to believe that there's a tension between God and science. We see God portrayed in all sorts of ways and forms and styles and likenesses and so on. And we've kind of culturally accepted, for some reason, this misconception that to be a person of science means you can't be a Christian, or to be a Christian or a person of faith, you cannot be a person of science. And that simply is not true. Now, again, if you're leaning in and you're skeptical today, and you're asking questions and you're wondering, you're kind of suspicious, great, because understand that the person who's talking to you today is not someone who was raised in an evangelical Christian church, okay? I was raised a nominal Catholic, like most of you who are watching today were raised. My faith had no real relevance in my life. It was something I just inherited from my parents and my parents' parents before them. It really had no effect in my day-to-day living. In fact, more than that, I was naturally skeptical of religion. I thought religion was an organized system that was corrupt and just seek to take advantage of innocent and stupid people for the sake of taking their money, and very often their freedom. I came to Christianity from a perspective of, I don't believe it, I'm against it, I think it's all a load of nonsense. In fact, I can remember being a teenager and with my friends turning on like God TV and just laughing at all these stupid Christians and the stupid things that they did. So I was definitely not a friend of Christianity or a friend of the quote unquote church. I came to this subject matter, to this Christianity, very much like some of you are right now, from a skeptical point of view. However, as I began to investigate Christianity, as I began to open my mind to a conversation, to a dialogue, to look at it from a scientific point of view. In fact, I came to Christianity trying to disprove Christianity. I remember saying to someone who was sharing faith with me, I'm going to study the Bible, study this stuff, and I'm going to show you why you're wrong. The issue was, of course, the problems that I wrestled with in Christianity actually led me to the person of Christ. As I was trying to disprove and discredit Christianity and its message, I actually ended up having an encounter with Jesus Christ that changed my life forever. It was a moment of simple faith that completely transformed who I am. And it was a moment of faith that happened because of my skeptical, scientific, evidence-based approach to trying to prove God's existence. God became real to me. And as a result of that, I decided, you know what? I want to spend the rest of my life helping others to do the same. That's why I'm sitting in this chair right now talking to you today. So what I want to do in part one is I want to confront the myth that people who believe in God don't believe in science. Or flip it on its head, that people who believe in science don't believe in God, okay? And how I'm going to do that is looking at four different things. I'm going to look at science and secularism. I'm going to look at atheism versus theism. I'm going to look at science versus the church. And finally, and probably most controversially, I'm going to look at evolution versus faith. So number one, again, by the way, all of today's notes, and there's a lot of notes, and if you like notes, want to go deeper, by all means, please simply download the Bible app by YouVersion, click on more, click on events, click on your location, Lighthouse Church Dublin, Lighthouse Church Navan, and all of today's notes will be there for you. And if you are the notes, scroll down. Number one, science and secularism. Now, secularism is probably the most defining term for our culture right now. Ireland is becoming or has become a secular nation. We hear this language tossed about all the time in the media, in the news, in descriptions about Europe and especially the nation of Ireland. But what is secularism? Well, technically speaking, secularism is the belief that there is no God. Now notice it's a belief. Secularism is the belief that there is no God. And therefore, if there's no God, no higher form, no higher being, therefore, there is no spirituality. By definition, secularism believes that all things are purely physical. There's no soul. There's no higher dimension. There's nothing beyond what you see, feel, can taste, and touch in the human experience. We are purely physical beings. And again, the rise of secular society didn't come about by accident. It was not only created, but it actually was predicted at the beginning of the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, that the Western world would become more and more secular in an attempt to discredit and undermine the Christian message. But to a large extent, this has backfired. Why? Because what we see happening now is, again, like I said, a surge in people who are not running away from faith per se because of secularism, but actually going deeper in their faith as a result of science. It's undeniable that there is a large exodus of people who are moving away from traditional forms of Christian church, but as a whole, people now in Ireland, it could be argued, are more spiritual than ever. Why? As a result of their understanding of science. It's like Quentin Smith, who's a well-known atheist and philosopher. He wrote an article about kind of bemoaning the fact or complaining the fact that, historically speaking, the vast majority of philosophical departments and philosophical lecturers in the United States were ardent atheists. But all of a sudden something is beginning to shift, where there's a change, there's a kind of a transformation where more and more philosophers, philosophical lecturers and philosophical departments are becoming more and more theistic, kind of culminating in the fact that the most prestigious most famous, most influential living philosopher today is a guy by the name of Alvin Plantinga, who is a born-again Christ follower. Here's what Quentin Smith said. He said, the field of philosophy is being desecularized across universities in America. 1/4 to 1/3 of the philosophy departments now consist of theists, generally Christians. Which is kind of crazy, because what he's saying is, hang on a second, time out. This wasn't the plan. This wasn't the purpose. This wasn't the design. The design was to create a secular culture so we can evolve past our need from God. What's happening is, as people are allowed to think and study and exert their rationale and really scrutinize things, all of a sudden it's bringing them back to the core tenets of faith. In fact, David Bentley Hart, who's another well-known philosopher, he said, the evidence that people are coming across isn't pointing people away from God, but it's pointing people towards God. He said, and I quote, I do not regard true philosophical atheism as an intellectually valid or even cogent position. This is huge. In fact, I see it as a fundamentally irrational view of reality, which can be sustained only by a tragic absence of curiosity or a reverently resolute will to believe the absurd. The case for belief in God is inductively so much stronger than the case for unbelief, that true philosophical atheism must be regarded as, watch this, a superstition. And this is incredible. This is a modern day philosopher saying the evidence isn't saying, hey, look how this evidence disproves God. It's saying, hey, actually, this evidence, if you really look at it with an open mind, begs the question, what happened? There's something more beyond just the physical realm. And so, in essence, what Bentley Hart would say is that atheism is just as superstitious as Christianity is perceived to be our other religions. Atheism, in a sense, is a faith position. To be an atheist does not believe you don't believe anything. To be an atheist believes you believe in atheism. It's a faith position. Why? Because you can't, an atheist would say to a Christian, you can't prove the existence of God. To which a Christian would retort, well, you can't disprove the existence of God. So my faith position in the fact that God exists is just like your faith position that God doesn't exist, because you can't prove or disprove the metaphysical existence of God. And again, that's how I landed up in this gig. This is how I ended up becoming a pastor. I mean, if you had told my mother 20 years ago that one day her son's going to be a reverend, she would have fallen off her chair. I mean, if you'd asked my classmates which one of the 30 students in this class will one day grow up to lead a church, my name would not have even been in the top 10, people. This was not the way the thing was supposed to go. But as I began to wrestle with faith, as I began to scrutinize Christianity, as I began to really wrestle with the rigorous questions that I thought that as I wrestled with Christianity would fall apart, all of a sudden my eyes were open to the fact that, hang on a second, what the pill that I've swallowed, the worldview that I was given, isn't as secure and as provable and as consistent as I was led to believe it was. And what began as my journey to disprove the existence of God ultimately led to God proving himself real to me. And that wasn't just it started as an intellectual thing, but it also transcended intellect to transform my heart, my soul, my very being, to transform me as a person. So the idea that science and secularism disprove God, again, is a theory, it's a point of view, it's definitely not a fact. Okay, moving on, number 2. Atheism versus theism. Now, like I said, the atheistic worldview is a faith position. Okay, if you're someone who's watching right now and you say, I'm an atheist and I have no faith, that's not true. Because your atheistic worldview is a faith position. You may retort, well, how is my atheistic view a faith position? Because you can't prove it with science. You can't prove it, therefore you're taking what you believe, and the key word is you believe it, by virtue of faith. You're putting your trust in it even though you can't believe. In fact, many people who say, I doubt the existence of God, I doubt, the reality of heaven, I doubt all these things, they fail to see that even doubt itself is a faith position. Doubt and atheism are both worldviews. Even those you're watching right now, skeptics who say, I'm curious, but I'm suspicious. I'm not sure. I've got all these doubts. Understand that what you think is an objective intellectual position is actually a faith position, because you can't prove either way. In fact, Timothy Keller, well-known author, said doubts are simply a set of alternative beliefs. Doubts are in themselves a faith position. Now, here's the problem. The problem is many of us have blind spots. Blind spots emotionally, blind spots intellectually, blind spots physically. We have all these blind spots. The trouble in a conversation like this is very often we're blind to our blindness. We don't even realize how blind we become. In fact, most of what we believe, we've just accepted from secondary school teachers, popular media, and what Hollywood says is true. Which, when you put it like that, you think, well, actually, that's pretty scary. Because we have staked our entire lives, our existence, our being, our understanding of the universe on popular culture. Now, that's okay if popular culture is establishing its faith positions on evidence-based science, but very often that is not the case, as we're going to see. And the challenge for those of us who have faith and have a very real, vibrant, passionate faith, not the kind of faith you hide in your pocket when you're around certain friends, or a kind of faith you switch off because you're going to work, or the kind of faith that you leave at home because it's lockdown. Those who have a real faith, those who are truly following Jesus, we come against this tension all the time. Because whether we're with friends or in work, wherever we go, we're kind of laughed at for, in modern day Ireland, actually believing in God. But the truth is, people who think to have an objective, intellectually superior position as agnostics or atheists, or people who doubt or are skeptical, they don't realize that their position is an equally faith-based position as ours. It's like the story I heard of a nurse who graduated from college and started working in a hospital. And she was a Christian, and she was very open with her faith. And after a couple of weeks, the kind of senior staff came and told her, listen, we respect your Christianity, but you're not allowed to bring your faith into the workplace. The workplace is a professional place. Faith needs to stay at home. So don't bring your faith to work, basically. And of course, she was conflicted, because you can't not bring your faith with you. I mean, if you're really a Christ follower, wherever you go, there your faith is, because God lives in you. I mean, the Holy Spirit goes where you go. And faith can never be a private thing. Faith is always a public thing. Why? Because faith is action. Love is action. You can't hide your faith, okay? So she's wrestling with this. And one day, doctors are debating what to do about a certain man who's on life support. And eventually they make the decision that the most compassionate thing to do is to switch off the life support machines and let this man pass away. And as they do that, and they're standing there reverently watching him pass away, and then eventually he dies, one of the doctors says, well, at least now he's in a better place. To which another says, yes, at least now the pain is over. To which the Christian nurse begins to reflect on these comments and go, hang on a second, how do you know where he is there is no pain? How do you know he's in a better place? How do you know he even is? I mean, all of those statements from quote-unquote atheists, okay, people who have no faith, are faith statements. You can't validate, prove, or disprove those statements. You don't know that that man is not suffering anymore. You can't prove that fact. And so what we see in this analogy, in this illustration, is that people who think they have no faith and would say they have no faith make faith statements every single day. And again, some people are in essence unintentionally blind to their blindness. They do it by accident, just because they haven't been provoked to think and really wrestle with these questions. But other people are very much intentionally blind to their blindness. They don't want to wrestle with these questions because they're afraid what happens to their worldview if they wrestle with these questions. And again, this is evidenced in what people in this camp are saying. Richard Lewontin, who is a well-known and revered Harvard biologist and atheist, said this. He said, and I quote, "We have a prior commitment to materialism." Watch this. "It is not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but, on the contrary, that we are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door." What is this Harvard biologist saying? He's saying basically, in essence, that what's driving his science is not fact, but philosophy. His science is not evidence-based fact, okay? It's that his philosophy argues that if he allows a divine foot in the door, then his whole worldview might begin to come crashing down. Therefore, what this Harvard biologist does and influences through his lectures and his writings is he simply ignores the questions. He simply just turns a blind eye to all the evidence and simply chooses to play the game in a way that suits him in a purely physical realm. This is hugely troubling, because many of you watching right now, you have staked your worldview, what you understand of the world, upon the writings and speaking and the research and the teaching of such academics, who are basically saying, it's like a politician saying, yeah, we did all the research about the coronavirus, but we left out all this data because it didn't suit our position. I mean, there would be uproar. There would be riots in the streets, because that is not how we should act as rational, democratic human beings. But this is true for many of us. It's not fact that drives our worldview, but philosophy. And in this series, what we're saying is, we don't want to just be like talking heads, backing up what we say with what we say. We want to really look at these issues from a fact-based, scientific, evidence-based approach. We want to be reasonable in what we're talking about here today and throughout this series. The question that we all have to ask ourselves, whether you're a Christian or non-Christian alike, is what are you blind to right now? You know, what blindness are you blind to right now? Where is your blind spot? Even as a Christian, we got to be careful that we don't just accept our blind spots too. We need to wrestle with some things. And I know in the coming weeks, there's going to be some things in hypocrisy and even hell and even evil and suffering that we got to wrestle with as Christians. But if you're someone who's skeptical right now and you're watching and you've adopted this atheistic, secular, faith-based position, then ask yourself the question, what blindness are you blind to right now? Because the truth is very often we can be missing out on things that are important to us. We can be missing out on the benefit of a different worldview because we've simply adopted blindly someone else's worldview, even though they admit they've left out critical evidence to form that worldview. It reminds me of a story I heard many years ago of a young mother who was preparing a Christmas turkey. I know it's too early to talk about Christmas, but hey, we're in lockdown, so all we got left to look forward to right now is Christmas. And as she's preparing this turkey, her curious 7-year-old daughter looks over as she meticulously flavors and spices this thing, and just before she puts the turkey in the pan, she lops off both the turkey legs, okay? To which all of you who love the legs should be thinking, oh no, why would you do that? So the daughter, being very curious, asked the mom, why do you cut off the legs? And before you cook the turkey? And she says, well, that's just the way we've always done it. And the daughter goes, but why? And she goes, well, that's just the way I was taught. And the daughter goes, why? And she goes, that's just the way my mother did it. To which the daughter goes, but why? What is the rationale? What is the reason? What is the evidence that makes you cut off these legs? And eventually the mother gets the kind of heart of the question, realizes, actually, I don't know why I do this. I've done this every year at Christmas for my entire life. I don't know why. So basically they hop in the car and they drive to the granny's house and knock on the door and, well, Gran, how's it going? How's the crack? Are you doing all well here? And of course, this doesn't happen during COVID times because that's illegal right now. But and ask the granny basically, just quick question, like, why do you always cut the leg off the turkey before you put in the pan? To which the granny says, well, that's the way I've always done it. And they go, why? And she said, that's the way I've done it. Why? That's the way my mother did it. Well, why? He said, I don't know. So the granny, the mother, and the daughter all get in the car, drive across town, again, non-COVID times, knock on the door to great granny's house. And they come in, sit down, and it's like, after a cup of tea and some chit-chat, they go, so here's the question. Why do you cut the legs off the turkey before putting it in the pan? There's 3 generations of people who are wondering why you do this. Because the last generation said, well, I want to know why. To which the great granny chuckled and said, well, simple. When I was growing up, we simply didn't have a pan big enough for the full turkey, so we always cut the legs off. That was it. For 4 generations, people are missing out on turkey legs because one person had a reason, a rationale approach for doing something, and the other generations never scrutinized that fact. Now, of course, I'm talking in a comedial sense about turkey legs, but who knows, especially if you're a skeptic right now, who knows what's at stake if you've just adopted a worldview without really wrestling with why that worldview is your worldview, okay? So that's atheism versus theism. Number 3, science then, as a whole, and the church specifically. So again, there's this tension, this false dichotomy that science, and not just Christianity, but science and the church are enemies. Like, wasn't it, we're kind of told and taught in school that anytime a scientific discovery happened historically, the church came and said, no, don't be doing that, because if you discover science, then our control of the world will go away, because people will see that God isn't really real, and so don't do that. And then all of a sudden there's this enlightenment period, because people start discovering stuff, and that led to the downfall of the church. And that simply is not true. It's not true. Historically speaking, the church has been a friend of science. The church has been a primary supporter of science. In fact, when you look at the evidence, the whole argument of faith versus science is not even taken seriously anymore in the academic world. Like, academics just don't want to talk about it anymore. It's just not real. In fact, some academics would argue not only are the church and science not enemies anymore, but that the church birthed modern science. The church birthed modern science. And again, there's reasons for this. Why? Because think about, for example, animism. Animism is the belief that God is in all things. So if you're someone who believes that God is in the trees and the rocks and the leaves, you can't really cut open a rock or cut down a tree to study how that tree works. So animism is not compatible with science. Subjecting deistic material to objective study is not ideal. Well, Buddhism believes that the whole world is essentially one big illusion. There's no point really studying it, because it's all a lie. Polytheism believes that everything that happens because the gods are angry. So, there's wind, there's a storm coming to Ireland. Roofs have been blown off houses, cars turning over. Someone says, why is this happening? Can we understand why? And can we learn and adapt and measure and be prepared in the future? To which polytheism says, no, Poseidon's angry. He's stirring up the waters. To which you go, what should we do in a storm? And someone says, sacrifice your child. I mean, that's not compatible, sacrificing your child to appease the gods, with science. And of course, there's the two other big ones, Islam and Judaism, which are very distinct to those three. But by definition, Islam and Judaism are more focused on jurisprudence, which is the study of the law and how the law applies to life, than the world as a whole. Christianity is distinct in contrast to all these other faith positions, these worldviews, in the sense that in the scripture, God invites us as humanity to find him in creation. In fact, he gives a specific command. It's an imperative that Adam and Eve together, man and woman together, okay, as equals, should rule the world. They should go after it and understand it and steward it, because in that they're going to find God. And to back this up, there was an article written by Ken Richard, a scientist, called Variables. And he said, when you study the Christian scriptures, there's 10 reasons that basically led to not only science and the church being compatible, but the church helping to birth modern science. And they are, from the top, number 1. He said, number 1, the physical universe, according to scripture, is a distinct and an objective reality. And again, that's what modern science believes. Number 2, that the laws of nature exhibit order, patterns, and regularity. This is what the scripture teaches. This is also what science believes. Number 3, the laws of nature are uniform throughout the physical universe. Again, this is what scripture teaches. This is what science believes. Number 4, the physical universe is intelligible, meaning it's comprehensible, meaning it's there to be understood. It can be studied. Things can be learned. Again, we see this not just true in scripture, but also backed up in science. Number 5, the world is good, valuable, and in fact worthy of careful study. Again, it's not just an accident. Many religions and faith views don't hold this perspective. Some believe the world is evil and nasty and should be destroyed, but Christianity believes the world was good and created good, and there's value in the world, and it's worthy of careful study. Number 6, the world, this is crucial, is not divine. The world is not divine, and therefore is not a proper object of worship, but of rational study. Number 7, Human beings possess the ability to discover the universe's intelligibility. True. Number 8, the free agency of the Creator makes the empirical method necessary. True. Number 9, God encourages, even propels science. True, is imperative to humans to take dominion over nature. Number 10, and finally, the intellectual virtues essential to carrying out scientific enterprise are part of God's moral law. Christianity does not combat or tear down or threaten science, nor does science threaten the church and the church historically. Rather, the two are compatible, and it was the fact that the Western world was largely Christian in ethos and worldview that allowed modern science to be birthed. Not only that, but think about where science comes from. College, university. Well, the university was a 12th century Christian invention. All these Christian scientists were like, we need to have these diverse conversations in a unified way about how creation reveals creator. Let's create these centers of thinking and talking and wrestling and studying to do that. And they create the university. In fact, universities like Harvard and Yale and Oxford, and even our very own Trinity College Dublin were founded by Christians. That's why it's called Trinity, okay? It was Christians that founded these centers of science and academia, not because they were threatened by it. Why would they found this universities are threatened by it? But because they believed this is what Christian faith does. It propels us to learn and to wrestle with these questions. Not only were universities largely Christian, but in fact, many of the original and most prolific scientists were also Christian. People like Augustine, people like Aquinas, people like John Wycliffe, people like Copernicus and Francis Bacon, not Kevin Bacon, Francis Bacon, were all Christians. And of course, the reason why Francis Bacon is famous, historically speaking, it's not because he invented bacon, although thank God for bacon, but in fact, he invented the scientific method, people. He invented the very system to which we ascertain science. A Christian, a Christ follower, person of faith gave us the method to which we have scientific discovery. The church is not at war with science, and nor does science discredit or undermine the church. Of course, there's always been abuses, and there have been abuses historically, and we'll look at that next week in hypocrisy. But as a whole, Christianity, it can be argued, as many scholars say, largely was the reason for the birthing of modern science. Okay, fourth and finally, and probably the most controversially, let's talk about evolution. So you're watching right now, you're a Christian, you're in secondary school, you're in college, you're in the workplace. You know, this worldview evolution is everywhere. It's popular. It's the most kind of adhered to story of how the world happened out there. And obviously our view in many ways contradicts this. So it's always hard to hold a view that's contradictory to the popular view. Right now, maybe you're watching, you're not a Christ follower, you're skeptical. To you, evolution makes sense. You've read some books. So it's kind of like, well, where's the conversation? Well, let me kick off by saying this. That when it comes to the rationalization, remember our approach is a rational evidence base. When it comes to the rationalization of evolution, understand, friend, you can't just say, I believe in evolution. Well, first of all, because again, like I've said over and over again, that's a faith position. You may go, well, it's not, it's science. Well, it's not really, because evolution is not fact. The dirty, dark secret of evolution is that it's not fact. You can't prove evolution. It's a theory. It's an hypothesis. It's a perspective. It's a deducible explanation. It's an observable, what would you say, possibility. But evolution is not fact. Why? Because for something to be fact, you have to be able to prove or disprove. So when it comes to the rationalization and the logical view of evolution, understand that evolution in essence is a faith position. Now, I think when you look at the facts, you look at the actual facts, it takes more faith to believe in evolution than does believe in God. And you may go, hang on a second, how are you saying that? Well, because when you actually study evolution and study Christianity, the facts are we have evidence of a living Christ changing hearts all around us. That's why you're watching a 30-something-year-old Irish dude with no spiritual religious background talking to you about God, because God changed my life. And there's a whole bunch of people right now that are watching this with you who call themselves part of the family of Lighthouse Church. And worldwide, there are billions of people who call themselves Christians. So there's evidence every single day for the activity of God. But yet, when it comes to evolution and its faith position, let's be honest, first cause hasn't been proven. Nobody can explain the complexity of the human eye. There's no fossil record. And obviously, most importantly, there's no transitional forms. I mean, you can't just fly to an island in the Pacific and find a half duck, half monkey. I mean, there's absolutely no factual evidence to say evolution is real. None. It's all conjecture. It's all, what would you call it, opinion-based research. And again, the professionals, the academics know this. Stephen Gould, who is a celebrated evolutionary paleontologist. In fact, he was claimed to be the greatest paleontologist of the last generation and an ardent atheist. What did he say about this? Well, he said this: the extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as the trade secret of paleontology. His words, not mine, people. The evolutionary tree that adorns our textbooks have data only at the tips and nodes of their branches. The rest is, now watch this, the rest is, his words, not mine, the rest is inference. Meaning, if you're someone who believes you can't embrace Christianity because you believe in evolution, or you're a Christian struggling to believe in what you believe because of evolution, the greatest and most celebrated paleontologist of the last generation says that basically 99.9% of the evolutionary theory is inference. You're going to stake your entire life and worldview on inference. To me, that requires far, far more faith than believing in Christ Jesus and the reality of God. In other words, our generation and our world has built its entire worldview and faith system on inference. Not evidence, but inference. Inference, conjecture, deduction, opinion-based analysis based on observations. And again, this is where the tension lies in this, because the truth is, you think about faith as a whole, the evolutionary standpoint is a faith-based worldview, but according to evolution, faith has no evolutionary benefit. Why? Because if you think about it, in essence, evolution negates the reason for faith. That's why, as someone who believes in evolution, you think there's no need for faith. But of course, the truth is, you can't believe in evolution without faith. But if you deduce and take down the evolutionary argument to its core, evolution basically says the mind that believes in evolution can't be trusted. You can't trust your own mind because it's just a product of evolution. There's no higher form. There's no absolute truth with a capital T. We're just biological beings, and we're obsessed with just surviving and passing on our genes to the next gene pool. Therefore, what we think about evolution and what we think about anything can't really be trusted. In fact, that isn't just some wild comment I'm making. This was actually professed by the inventor, creator, originator of evolution himself, Charles Darwin. Look at this chilling quote taken from Charles Darwin's own diary. He said, "Within me, the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of a man's mind, which have been developed from the mind of lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind if there are any convictions in such a mind? I mean, would you trust your kids with a monkey? Probably not. So Darwin's saying, if what I believe is true, if my faith position is factual, then how do I even believe or trust the mind that led me there? Because ultimately all my mind is the biological consequence of millions of years of evolution. Or maybe something else is going on. Now again, the reason for this, historically speaking, is quite simple. Darwin obviously lived in a day and time where the scientific tools that we had simply didn't exist. A lot of science back then was what we call observational science. He was looking externally at things and looking at similarities and trying to connect the dots. But in today's day and age, with all the wonders of modern technology, we've transitioned from simply observational science to origin science. And when you study origin science, when you look at human DNA and the cosmos and all these things, we see that there's a difference between nature and higher forms. Nature and higher forms. Let me give you an example. One of our favorite places to go as a family is Glendalough, County Wicklow. Wonderful, wonderful place. Now, when you go to Glendalough and you stand by the lake and you see the hills and the trees and the lake and the rocks, you look out at that beautiful scene, you go, nature. I mean, wind and rain and time caused that rock to be round, caused the hill surface to be bare, caused the trees to grow. I mean, it's nature. But as you're walking back towards the car and you walk through the graveyard and you see the round tower and you see the church and you see the abbot's house, you don't look at the round tower and say nature, right? Because behind the construction of the round tower was a higher form. There was a mind, okay? Yes, the lake may have been nature, but the construction was not nature. It was a higher form. There was a mind, there's something behind that creation. When you look at an observational sense at nature, you kind of go, well, things may have just happened naturally here. But when you, through the modern wonders of technological advancement, look at the human DNA, the human genome, you look at all these things, you see not in essence observation science, but art science. You see a mind. You see there's a method to all this madness. I mean, think about looking through a microscope. I mean, Francis Collins, who was the man who mapped the human genome. I mean, he was a non-Christian. He was an atheist and mapped the human genome and wrote a whole book called The Language of God. It was his study of how we are basically constructed in a DNA sense that led him to believe in the existence of a higher form. When you study human DNA, you cannot basically ignore the fact that there is a mind behind how we are made, and more biologists and people in this field are turning to a theistic point of view because of this very reason. Or how about microscope to telescope? Think about Edwin Hubble, who in the 1920s looked through his telescope and realized and basically proved, and it's called the greatest scientific discovery of the 20th century, that the world didn't kind of happen over time. The world began in one moment, the Big Bang Theory. There was one distinct moment and the whole world began. It all happened. The world isn't being created or developing or evolving. The world happened at one time. You see, whether it's through the microscope or the telescope, what we see is science is all the time bringing us back to God. Robert Jastow, who is a celebrated astronomer and agnostic, said, and I quote, "We now see how the astronomical evidence leads us to a biblical view of the origin of the world." That the chain of events leading to humankind commenced suddenly and sharply at a definite moment in time, in a flash of light and energy. The scientist's pursuit of the past ends in an exceedingly strange development, unexpected by all except theologians. That there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. This is mind-blowing. This is mind-blowing that an agnostic scientist would say that it's pretty much evidentially factual that there is a mind behind creation. You see, as it comes to the whole argument of evolution versus faith and evolution versus Christianity, we see that evolution is just as much a faith position as Christianity. In fact, someone argues, I do, that it takes more faith to believe in evolution than Christianity, and that science more and more the more people thought, the more sophisticated science becomes, the more technologically advanced science becomes, the more God will be disproved. But the exact opposite is happening. The more sophisticated science becomes, the more clearly it points us back creation to its creator. Science cannot disprove Christianity. Science cannot disprove the existence of God, nor can evolution. In fact, this is called the NOMA principle. NOMA standing for non-overlapping magisterial authorities. The idea that science exists predominantly in the physical realm. Darwin was observing physical facts, but there's a metaphysical side to all this. There's a metaphysical side to astronomy. There's a metaphysical side to human biology. Meta, the Greek word meaning beyond or after, and the ultimate fact is science cannot disprove God's existence. It can't prove God's existence, nor can it disprove, because science has limits. Physics can't disprove metaphysics. It can only point to, it can only highlight, it can only raise certain questions. It's why Stephen Jay Gould, the Harvard professor of zoology, said, nature just is. in all her complexity and diversity, in all her sublime indifference to our desires. Therefore, we cannot use nature for our moral instruction or for answering any question within the magisterium of religion. To say it for my colleagues, and for the umpteenth millionth time, science cannot, by its legitimate methods, adjudicate the issue of God's superintendence or nature. We neither affirm nor deny it. We simply cannot comment on it as scientists. From the words of a Harvard professor of zoology. Conclusion: science does not disprove God. Science is not enemy of the church. To embrace science doesn't mean you have to eject your faith. And to be someone who values science doesn't mean you can't live a life or have a world that's compatible with the Christian method. In fact, it's arguable from today's talk that science, more and more, as we go deeper and further in our scientific study, is pointing towards the reality and potential existence of God. That's why I submit to you, more and more people like Jordan Peterson, a clinical psychologist and professor of biology, is turning to a faith paradigm. Because it's almost like the deeper that we look in the microscope and the further we look through the telescope, they point back to this one key question: who is Jesus? In conclusion, Alistair McGrath, Oxford professor, said this. He said, the idea that science and religion are in perpetual conflict is no longer taken seriously by any major historian of science. One of the last remaining bastions of atheism survives only at the popular level, namely the myth that an atheistic, fact-based science is permanently at war with a faith-based religion. It's not even taken seriously anymore. So if the academics and the professionals don't take it seriously, then why should we? See, the true reason why this conversation still happens is not because there's a lack of evidence to support the existence and reality of God. It's because of the intentional suppression, as we heard admitted in a quote earlier on, the intentional suppression of the evidence, because people with an atheistic worldview don't know how to wrestle with or reconcile their thoughts with the acceptance of the metaphysical nature and reality of our world. Paul, the apostle, summed it up brilliantly in the book of Romans, chapter 1, verse 20, when he said, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what was made, so that people are without excuse. My friend, I want to pray for you today. I want to pray that if you're a Christ follower, may your faith be strengthened as you intellectually and rationally wrestle with these problems. And if you're a skeptic, I want to pray that you would be open-minded to these points, to this research, this talk, and maybe consider the fact that maybe God is real, and maybe he does exist. And because he exists, what he says about himself and you also exists to be true. And that is that he loves you. He has a plan and purpose for your life and wants to know you personally. And as we wrestle over the next couple of weeks with hypocrisy and hell and evil and suffering, may these things not pull us further away from God, but draw us closer to him in a way like never before, because God is not threatened by our questions. God stands up under the scrutiny of our, what would you call it, conversation. And I believe as a result, we will be stronger and we come out the other end. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.